What's up, everybody? This is a new episode of Energon Entries, and it's going to be a little bit different. I talk a lot about the toys. I talk a lot about the release schedule of these shows and how I'm watching them on Tubi when I'm reviewing them, but I'm not entirely sure about exactly how they were released. And so I went back. I went back and looked at the toys. I went back and looked at the release schedule. And in this episode, we're going to dive into Season 1, the order I watched them, the order they were released, and the toys that accompanied them, this time on Energon Entries. Welcome back to Energon Entries, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Freites. I hope that this finds you well. I want to thank you for your patience last week, as time just got caught up with me and I wasn't able to put out an episode. Well, I probably could have, if I'm being honest. It's just I couldn't have put it out to the quality that I like to. So I wanted to make sure I did something a little bit special this week. So not only are you going to get this episode, but you're going to get another one. So if you haven't seen it yet in your feed, make sure to go and check out the review that we did this week. But let's talk about some toys. So we're going to talk about Season 1 specifically. It's going to be a little bit shorter than normal, but one thing that I've talked about a lot on the show that I haven't gone back and done the research on, which I'm sure somebody listening has thought, why doesn't this idiot just go back and Google it? But I'm watching the show on Tubi, which is a free app. It's obviously not the best app in the world, and it doesn't necessarily have it all in chronological order. And so I've kind of wondered in Season 2 specifically about, well, all of these new robots come in, they come out. There's really no consistency in seeing them at first. And I've kind of wondered to myself, like, I wonder what order these episodes were released in. And then I decided, you know what, because we're adding new robots and such, let's look into the toys. So I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this are already big Transformers fans. A lot of you might actually already know this, but this is to really document it for me, because as we're going through this show, we're now a year into this, I want to make sure that we evolve, and I want to make sure that the content continues to do different things, because once we get to the end of the Generation 1 show, we're going to have to figure out what to do. And I'll be honest with you, this show in terms of listenership has continued to grow, and interaction has continued to grow, and it's just, I need to do better. I need to make sure that I'm giving you the content that you all want. And so I'm going to try and do something new here. And honestly, the other thing I want to ask before we get into this is, do you all want video? Because in today's content world, they say that video is king and that audio is falling by the wayside. I enjoy doing audio more, and I think that right now the listenership has continued to grow. I do have a YouTube channel for this. All it is right now is the episodes going up there, and it's not anything else. But if you want to see something else, I'm certainly game to do that. And so I just want to put those things out there. It's a little bit more of an informal episode, but let's talk about Season 1. So when I watched it, again, I watched it on Tubi. Now I checked it out. And the order I watched it, which you can go back, and also I have made seasons out of all of the content that I've put out here, so it's a little bit easier to distinguish what Season 1, Season 2, and so forth. And I'll continue to do that going forward. But obviously I watched the pilot, More Than Meets the Eye, parts 1, 2, and 3. I watched Transport to Oblivion, Roll for It, Divide and Conquer, Fire in the Sky, SOS Dinobots, Fire on the Mountain, War of the Dinobots, Ultimate Doom parts 1, 2, and 3, Countdown to Extinction, Plague of Insecticons, and Heavy Metal War. That was the order in which I watched it. And wouldn't you know it, folks, that's the order it was released. So if you go back to the pilot, and of course, this is according to ChatGPT, which does a lot of different things. I did look it up in other places as well. But full disclosure, sometimes ChatGPT is my assistant, and it really helps to put my thoughts down and kind of go there. But we got part 1, 2, and 3, September 17th, 18th, and 19th of 1984, which I didn't actually think about this, but I released the first episode of this podcast very, very around that time. And so it's interesting and sort of coincidental that I would do that. And I think it's actually kind of cool. So the toys that were released around this time is, I know that there's a lot of confusion on exact release dates and so forth, but you obviously for the Autobots had Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Jazz, Prowl, Sideswipe, Ironhide, Ratchet, Hound, Mirage, Trailbreaker, Wheeljack, Brawn, Cliffjumper, Windcharger, Gears, and Huffer. All of those were released for Autobots, which is actually I think almost every single Autobot that you see in season 1 for the most part. And then for Decepticons, you have Megatron, Soundwave, which came with Buzzsaw, which I don't think that you saw in the pilot. I think Laserbeak is who you saw in the pilot. Starscream, Thundercracker, Skywarp, Rumble, Ravage, Laserbeak. So Buzzsaw is the only one here that I believe wasn't seen in the pilot. I'd have to go back and watch again. Maybe I'll do so. So obviously you have a ton of, the base of all the toys have come out by this point. So you go back to Transport to Oblivion, all the toys that were out with Wave 1, all of those were still out here. And I think you start moving down the line, and obviously you still have Roll For It, September 29th, 1984. Transport to Oblivion was the 24th, only 5 days apart, which is interesting. So these episodes are coming out, they're coming out hot. It isn't really until you get to Fire in the Sky, which was in December of 1984, that you get some new stuff. You get Reflector, who is the camera. That's actually pretty cool, but it was a mail-in exclusive. Now, if you're old enough like me, you remember these things. You remember when you had to send a letter in order to get something, and you had to wait for it. Man, those were times. I mean, now you go on Amazon and you can buy something, have it that day if you wanted. But before, you used to have to do a lot of work. And when you were a kid, it was really, really hard to wait. And it was then until SOS Dinobots that we didn't start to see some new Autobots. And of course, that was Grimlock, Slag, and Sludge. And those were the ones that were introduced in that episode. So we're kind of building on this of course. And then you move down to War of the Dinobots. You get Snarl and Swoop, and that completes the 5 Dinobots that had been seen in the show up until that time. And with the Ultimate Doom parts 1, 2, and 3, you saw some reissues. You saw reissues of Optimus Prime, Ironhide, and Bumblebee. You saw reissues of Soundwave and Megatron. And I think that they were the most popular at that time. And I think, obviously, if you're looking at Hasbro, they're trying to make sure that they put out enough for the people that they feel are the most popular in the show. And so they have done that. Countdown to Extinction is when you see the Constructicons for the first time. Now, the Constructicons are interesting because they're combiners. The first combiners introduced, I believe, in the show. I know that in some other canon or some other lore in Transformers, the Dinobots can merge, but they don't in this show, or at least in season 1. But Scrapper, Hook, Bone Crusher, Long Haul, Scavenger, and Mixmaster, and they all came in a set, and they were combining to Devastator, so you saw that at the same time that they were released in the show. Pretty cool. The Insecticons come in right before the end of season 1, Shrapnel, Bombshell, Kickback, of course. We don't get any other Insecticons, but we finally see their toys. And of course, with Heavy Metal War, you still have Devastator, the Constructicons combined form. I don't believe this was a reissue. I believe it was already out. And throughout the course of season 1, you actually saw them release toys at a schedule that made sense with where they showed up in the show. And I think that's actually pretty cool. I think they had a better idea coming in because I believe that this concept was in Japan already. The toys, I think, were in production in Japan already. And so now you're trying to make it an Americanized thing. And so I think there was a little bit more continuity with how they did it here. Season 2, I think, is going to be the interesting one. But I think that looking at this, it was pretty straightforward. So it's nice to know that season 1, I watched them in the order that they were released back in the 1980s. So I watched it in its purest form, which is great. I think season 2 is going to be a little bit different, but that's sort of just a generic rundown of the toys that were out and how they met up with the releases of the episodes until then. Like I said, this is something a little bit different, something a little bit casual, but I wanted to put out sort of a miscellaneous episode, kind of getting everybody up to speed with the toys that were out, because we are going to deep dive into season 2 a lot later. A lot more new Autobots, a lot more new Decepticons, and kind of finding out where they fall into place is going to be what we strive for in the episode like this for season 2. But like I said, don't forget to hit subscribe and such, whatever podcast app that you listen to. If you haven't given me a rating on Apple or Spotify, I'd really appreciate it if you did. And again, I'd love interaction. mattyicemedia@gmail.com is the way to do that. You can send me questions, you can send me concerns, you can ask me to talk about certain things, because from what I understand, there is not a lot of Transformers audio podcasts out there. There are a bunch that have grown and that continue to stay out there, but from what I've noticed, they've kind of pared down what they talk about, and maybe they don't get into some of this as far as reviews are concerned. So I'm kind of going back and doing some things that probably have already been done, treading a path that's already been treaded, but I'm trying to do it in a different way, and as a 41-year-old, giving a perspective that's somewhat humorous and also just kind of realistic with what I see. I'd love to hear from people, and I'd love for this show to continue to grow, something that started as an experiment that is now turned into something real, and that's a really great feeling for me. Hope this finds everybody well, I hope this finds everybody safe, and I hope to hear from some of you, but I will talk to you next time. This is Energon Entries.